How are you doing, green industry business leaders? This is episode number 12 of the Green Industry Profits Podcast, where we talk about how green industry companies can grow in a profitable way. In today's episode, we had a conversation with Michael Pletz of How to Hardscape. We dive into his journey from working at a stone yard to a service-based hardscape company, estimating and pricing advice, tech stack recommendations, tips on increasing profits, and much more. And before we dive into this episode, just a quick note that this podcast is brought to you by Cycle CPA, a remote accounting firm that works specifically with green industry businesses. For more information, go to cyclecpa.com. And without further ado, let's get into today's episode. All right, so super excited for this episode here, and have our buddy here, Michael Pletz, with How to Hardscape. We are we've known Michael now for a few years, and I think just the resources that he provides for the industry. And if you haven't listened to his podcast yet, How to Hardscape, and even just going to his website, you can see a lot of the different things that he can do for your company. And super excited to have him on today. But thank you for joining us here, Michael.
Joe, thanks so much for having me on. It's awesome that you guys got the podcast going. You're past the hard part of launching it. Now it's just smooth sailing from here, isn't it?
Yeah, no, and it's a great way to just connect with people in the industry, people like yourself, because I think there's a lot of people, especially when running a small business, where it might feel like you're on an island. And I think having resources and people that you kind of go to that can kind of help with some of the decisions and certain things that companies are facing can be really helpful. So, but now, Michael, in regard to your background, how you got into the industry, mind going through that?
Yeah, absolutely. I tripped and fell into the industry. I was starting university and I was working for a grocery store. My manager came up to me, said her husband had a position at a stone yard that came open. It would be full-time hours during the summer. Would you be interested? I hopped on the opportunity with my buddy and we started working at this stone yard, and I kind of immediately fell in love with the products. We at the time I was starting, we were rebuilding the demo area outside. So I was already into the installation part of things. I worked there for about 7 years. So probably around like year two, year three, I started to do installations outside of work. So we would work Monday to Saturday. Saturday was like a half day till 2 p.m. And then I would go from 2 p.m. till as long as I could and install something on the side, as well as Sunday. So I was working kind of 56 hours at the stone yard, and then an additional like 15, 16 hours Saturday and Sunday, as much as I could, to install side projects. And I kind of continued that until I was making more money doing that than I was Monday to Saturday at the stone yard. It just made sense to start my own business. Started my own business, and then How to Hardscape kind of fell into that I also started that. So yeah, that's kind of how I started in the industry.
Very cool, Michael. And I think that's interesting that you had that experience working at a stone yard for quite a few years. Do you recommend, because there's a lot of people that maybe work in lawn care or maintenance that are maybe looking to switch to more hardscape or install based work, versus other people that may not even be offering any service, maybe looking to start up their own company, starting from scratch. I guess, do you feel that working first has helped you to then kind of step away and start your own company?
It definitely has. For people wanting to get into hardscape, there's a few avenues that you can kind of pursue to be able to get into them. Uh, the Stoneyard was great for product knowledge, not necessarily for installation knowledge, yes, but not like hands-on every single day. I do feel like I could have benefited from, after the Stoneyard, working for somebody for a couple of years, maybe, just to get a more hands-on the different equipment, and different scenarios that you might find yourself in, different access, what you can do, and so on and so forth. That would have been pretty beneficial. There's also online resources now that you can help to train yourself for getting into the industry. I've always said, especially for people in lawn care that already have kind of experience dealing with clients and have maybe some sort of background knowledge of hardscaping and maybe some installation background, best way is either to do a project for somebody that you know, maybe even at your own house, going down the online education route, and then getting that hands-on knowledge without having to do it for an actual client of how to do it. The next best thing is to actually get into what did when I first started my business was paver maintenance or lift and relays. And these are essentially the pavers are shifting, they're heaving, they're sinking. You lift those pavers up. This usually the entire project, if it's a small backyard patio, something like that, lift them all up, clean them, rescreed, so re-level and relay them. This is great because you're not getting into equipment, you're not getting overhead expense heavy. It gives you a taste of the industry, see if you enjoy it first before you dive in and start buying that equipment. And with that low overhead, you can price yourself appropriately and you don't have to get into the excavation, which is a little bit more technical. You don't have to get into the hardest part, and you get a taste for it, is the screeding, is how do you go about screeding. But with the levels already set, the slope already set, that lift and relay is nice and easy to be able to start learning how to screed, learning how to level, and then just relaying those pavers, installing polymeric sand, you're done. So I always recommend paver, lift and relays. Great way to get started in the industry, get a little taste for it, and then decide if you want to kind of dive on in there.
Very nice. And do you feel that working at the stone yard and then stepping into the hardscape company, do you feel that having that product knowledge enabled you to kind of educate the customer a little bit better and have that confidence, at least with that side of the business?
Definitely. There a lot of these paver manufacturers, they have great winter seminars, and you can get a good kind of download of what products they offer and everything like that. But when it comes to my experience at a stone yard, you kind of get a good wide breadth of all the different products that these manufacturers offer, the differences between through mix, face mix, wet cast, dry cast, and so on and so forth. There you just get like all of that immersed into you. You get to know how to deal with a client that, how to point them in the right direction of what they might be interested in. I'd say that's probably the best thing that I got from my experience there, is that now when I deal with clients, I'm very confident in asking them a couple of questions to get their tastes, and then saying, it seems like this paver might be for you, as opposed to handing them a catalog that has hundreds of different products and saying, choose one, let me know what you want. I can actually, meet them at the stone yard. I could ask them a couple of questions, point to different products on display, and then kind of really narrow down on what they might be looking for, and then explain to them the differences in, you could go through mix or you could go face mix. These are the benefits, these are the downsides, wet cast versus dry cast, etc. And really just kind of narrowing on what is the best product for them, rather than having them to have to choose through hundreds of different products that are now on the market there.
Very nice. And let's say there's a, $1 million company that does a lot of maintenance or lawn care work, and they're seeing a lot of opportunity in their markets, maybe provide some of the enhancement work, hard hardscape work. I guess what kind of recommendations would you have for a company like that? Would you consider, or would you think about maybe a company like that, maybe trying to hire someone that already has that expertise in the hardscape area? Or I guess what would be your recommendation there?
It depends, because if you hire somebody that has the experience, you're also hiring the baggage that they have and possible improper installation techniques and so on there. So you're hiring somebody that ideally knows how to install properly, but they might be bringing with them improper ways, because we've really involved in the industry from, not using stone dust and using geotextiles and geogrid in our base and open graded base over the past 10, 15, 20 years, that, an older school contractor may not have embraced, and that employee might be coming from that older school contractor and bringing with them the installation practices. So if you don't have the background knowledge of the benefits of open graded base versus dense graded base and the different geotextiles that you can use and where to use them and the geogrid and so on there, if you don't have that background knowledge, I wouldn't rely on an outside person coming in and knowing exactly how to install for you and putting your name on it. So I always fall back on get the background knowledge first. And I do that with everything in my business personally is um, everything from marketing to the bookkeeping side of things. I want the background knowledge so that I can actually, when I do outsource those things, or if I already have outsourced those things, I know that the person kind of stepping into that knows their stuff because I've got the background knowledge to do that. So I always fall back on that. And I don't know if you're at that stage, maybe you have an employee that wants to step up into more of a hands-on role and see if they would be interested in going to a hands-on winter seminar for a few days. Lots of great ones out there, and they can get hands-on knowledge of how to install and then get them started on a lift and relay project and see how they do and see how they enjoy it. And just like how you would start your own business, kind of set them up for success in doing so.
Very nice. And I like how you mentioned that they should have at least a basic understanding, the business owner.
Yes.
Because I think that also helps to reduce risk. Maybe if that employee something happens in the future, right, and maybe they're not able to lead that division, um, So I think understanding that role and having that basic view can definitely help. Now, so you went from the stone yard, started the company, started the hardscape company, and then there's that other aspect of it where it's maybe not just the technical aspect of you know doing the actual work in the field, but it's the business side, right? So how to do marketing, how to do recruiting, how to deal with HR or those different components of the company. Were those all things that you kind of learned from maybe trial and error, or I guess how did you kind of approach stuff like that?
Yeah, I would say trial and error is the best way that I learn personally. It burns me from time to time, but I don't know. When it comes to marketing, I had always been interested in marketing. I kind of started listening to podcasts back in 2014 is when I kind of started. So I started listening to podcasts that told me to start a podcast. So I started websites back then. I started podcasts back then. Uh, I have always made videos since I was in middle school. I've been, kind of accumulating this knowledge in marketing since a while back. And now I've got an avenue of resource to be able to kind of put that into practice. And that was how to hardscape. It's my business ever after landscaping, where I can actually kind of flex those muscles a little bit and what I've tried to do. So when it comes to marketing, yes, I've tried to have a lot of extensive knowledge in marketing. When it comes to bookkeeping, I've tried to research as much as possible and uh, put my books in order before I actually found a bookkeeper for us. When it comes to HR, still haven't figured that one out. And then when it comes to installation, yeah, it was kind of just an evolution of, working for that stone supplier all the way to starting my own business, Lift and Relay, to now design build, which we're I would say about 70% design build, 30% lift and relay at this point.
Awesome. And do you like that mix being 30% and 70% of the install base?
Yeah, I do. I've always said that I'd like a couple of crews or a mix of crews, one that does design build and one that does lift and relay, so that I can use the lift and relay as sort of like a training ground for those employees to then step up into a design build role, whatever that looks like. Not necessarily one crew, but maybe two crews, one crew, but always having that lift and relay. I think it's a really great way to service all types of clients and not just be a company for one specific client. And it's a little bit more recession proof in that if somebody has a front step that's falling apart, they need to get that fixed. Otherwise, it becomes a liability. If somebody has a front walkway that's heaving and it's a tripping factor and they have elderly people coming in and out of their house, that needs to be fixed. So it's always been something that I've wanted to kind of hold on to rather than push aside completely for the design build part.
Yeah. No, that's great stuff. And then for the business side of it, as for your tech stack, I guess what are your thoughts on that? What are some softwares that you currently use or you would recommend for some other companies?
I feel like you're setting me up for a layup here, but uh, when it comes to bookkeeping, QuickBooks, obvious one. I'd say I'm sure you'd say that that's kind of a standard. Everything else, we run through our own software. So the How to Hardscape headquarters we created, it's a budgeting estimating tool. We've now got our courses in it as well. So we have installation courses that used to be on our members website. Now it's within the software. So you can actually use it for yourself to train yourself, but you can also use it to train your employees. So you can assign it to your employees, have them go through it. You can see their progress through it. If they complete the test afterwards, they get a certificate of completion. So you actually see how they're doing, and you give them agency within your business. So you can actually be like, "Hey, you're signing on as a laborer. This is what you can do to get yourself to a lead role on the crew, and we're going to assign these courses to you. Do them in your own time. Show us that you want to get there. Take agency over." Your trajectory in our business, and that's kind of the goal of what we're trying to do. We're trying to add more and more courses such as outside experts in sales, in leadership, and so on and so forth. There, that's the next step that we're trying to take, so that you can set someone up for success in your business, and yeah, let them take agency in where they want to go in your business. Show them a career path in this industry, essentially.
Very nice. Yeah, no, and so installation courses, so even the technical aspects of Hardscape, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Technical aspects, we've got a budgeting course, an estimating course for those that want to learn how to get started in budgeting, learn how to estimate a project, take measurements, and so on. And then even a knowing your numbers course where Cycle CPA sits down and goes through a profit and loss statement, goes through a balance sheet, and explains to you what you need to look at. So that's the extent of the courses for now, and we're trying to expand on that, as well as more and more features for the software itself to help business owners succeed in their business there.
That's awesome, Michael. It's definitely a well needed resource. And you had mentioned estimating, and I think that alone can have a big impact on companies, right? And properly pricing work. And I guess what is your philosophy around that?
I've got a lot around this. I would say having a good budget in place that allows for growth in your business. So not just taking into factor the equipment, the overhead expenses, and so on and so forth that you want to add to your budget, but also thinking about what business you want to be tomorrow, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, and starting to save and create goals in that budget that you want to hit. It also see you want to price yourself as if you're the business that you want to be tomorrow as opposed to the business that you want to be today. Because if you are just starting out, you have no equipment and so on, start saving for that equipment today and charging as if you had that equipment. So that you can start to save for that down payment. And when that down payment time comes to buy that piece of equipment, it's in your bank account. It's not coming out of your profit or even worse, your salary, and you're having to reinvest into the business. So I'm a big fan of putting a budget in place that allows for that goal setting, that growth in your business, and then estimating from that budget. So what I like to do is I like to use a labor recovery rate method. And all this does is say I set the amount of time that I have in my season. So multiplying the weeks by the days by the hours per day that I work. And that gives me a total hours that I have in my season to make back the overhead that I have in my budget. So if I have, as an example, 1,000 hours in my season, and my project's going to take 100 hours to complete. That's 10% of my season. I need to add 10% of my overhead expenses into that, including my labor, my material cost, and a healthy profit on top of that. I think that in in project-based businesses, the biggest thing that we need to focus on is taking a healthy profit, because project-based businesses are not something that are very sellable, that you're going to make a huge amount of return on your investment at the end of its life. When and if you do go to sell them, you're likely selling assets, and that's likely equipment, maybe your website if it's got a good enough, and your name if it's got a good enough reputation. But something like a lawn care business is great to sell because it's recurring revenue, and that's an excellent thing to sell. um, so I'm a big fan of healthy profits, planning for growth, pricing appropriately. I'm not a fan so much of other overhead recovery systems, such as multiple overhead recovery system, where you take a percentage markup on materials, on labor, and on subs to be able to recoup your overhead. We could go more in depth on that, but I just don't believe in trying to recover my overhead through materials. I think that we sell labor. We are selling labor. That's what we do. That client can go buy materials if they wanted to, but it's a little bit more difficult to buy the labor to install those materials. I think that we are a labor business. We sell labor. We should be recovering our overhead through our labor.
I totally agree, Michael. And what profit margin would you typically build in? Is it, 15, 20%, or I guess what do you typically recommend?
I go for 20% net profit on my projects. So after I've gone ahead and I have priced my labor, I've priced my materials, I've got my overhead baked into that labor. I then add my 20% on top of that. And that's the goal to hit. Obviously, if you are marking up your materials a little bit more, and you're going to be a little bit higher than that 20% if you hit your labor hours for that project. If you're marking up subs and so on for it, you're likely going to be a little bit more as long as you're hitting that labor goal for that project. But 20% is the goal in my business.
Awesome. Yeah, no, and I know you had mentioned, lawn care, lawn maintenance might be something that acquirers may want to look at for the reoccurring aspect. But there are also positives in regard to, and it may not be just for the sale aspect of a hardscape company, but I would say one of them, even as we kind of see with our clients, Michael, is, there's when it comes to especially residential maintenance, the amount of customers that you need to get to pretty much match revenue that you can get via maybe a hardscape project, and you can gain that revenue a lot quicker. So we actually do see hardscape companies grow relatively quicker,
Hmm.
because of that, and also the ability to sell more, I think, based on value. I think it's a little bit easier on the hardscape side where you can separate yourself from the competition, whereas maintenance, I think, especially on the commercial side, it becomes uh you know it becomes a little bit more difficult with that. I think it's a little bit more of a commoditized thing. So but those are great points, and I like how you explained, you're basically a fan of kind of using labor as what you're basing on, how you're going to recoup your overhead, because labor is really what kind of drives that. So that's awesome. Is there any other financial metrics or any other metrics within the company that you typically like to look at and
Yeah,
track?
I like to, going back to not wanting to cover my overhead through materials. I don't even look at materials as part of my revenue. So I look at revenue less materials. And a lot of that has to stem from how I operate my business with that 70% design build, 30% maintenance, paver maintenance, is that those lift and relay projects have such little material costs. It's very heavy labor, and our design build have much more material costs when it comes to that project. So I look at our revenue less materials for that reason, and I think that's also a great reason to go even in a design build company, because when you're looking at certain work areas within a design build project, you could have a patio, you could have a fire pit, you could have an outdoor kitchen, and so on. You could go on and on. But each of those work areas will have different mixtures of materials to labor percentages for that project. And materials is not something that you can really control. What that client wants is what they want. It's not like they're going to want porcelain and you're going to talk them into pavers because you're going to be a little bit more profitable with pavers. Or, even between pavers, there's different costs associated with them. It's not something that you're necessarily going to control. You want to choose the best product for your clients. What you can control is labor. You can become more efficient. You can charge more for your labor. It also comes back down to also my thought process behind that labor rate recovery system. I'm more so looking at revenue, less materials. Materials, I don't want to be recovering my overhead through. I want to focus on my labor to recover that overhead. And for that reason, I don't even consider my materials in my revenue when I'm looking at how we're doing as a business. And that's just a personal thing, I think, there.
Absolutely, yeah. And so basically, if the secretary of a company is, if she's helping to book an appointment, or your accounting firm is doing the books, or um, your marketing team is getting this lead. So all of that overhead that's encompassed for that specific job, in essence, what you're saying, it doesn't matter if that specific material for that job is twice the expense, because it takes the same amount of time to basically install that versus another material, right? So, and I think that just goes to show again, I think with most service companies, using labor as really kind of that benchmark for
Definitely.
for
And in
that.
kind
So
of going off that example, the paver to porcelain was a poor example, but to give for hardscapers listening to this, or anybody really, you can take a large slab and it's going to cost more to purchase that slab, but the labor for installing that slab is much less. You can take a small 4x8 paver, very cheap. It's probably the third of the cost of a large slab, but the labor involved in installing that is going to be twice as much as installing those large slabs. Just the way that the installation process works for each of those, and the square footage that each of those kind of take up. So going back to a multiple overhead recovery system, if I'm marking up my materials to make back my overhead, those slabs costing more, we're actually going to make more money on with that overhead recovery system, but the labor is going to be much less. So why is it taking me less, but I'm making more? It just doesn't compute. But
yeah,
reversing that, which really doesn't make sense, is installing those 4x8s. Um, we're going to make a lot less in our overhead recovery with that markup, but it's actually going to take us even more time to install. So
yeah,
in hardscaping, the materials kind of dictate how long it's going to take us, but ultimately it's that length that we want to be um, measuring for the labor hours, as well as
yeah.
recovering our overhead, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think part of the issue there, and some might say, well, it's going to even out anyway because sometimes I might overprice it, sometimes I may underprice it, but you're going to end up closing more of the jobs that you underprice,
Yeah,
right? And then your profitability is not going to be where you want it to be, which is, I think it's looking at kind of knowing your numbers as almost like a competitive advantage within your company, right? The more clear you can do your estimating, the more you know your financials, the better position you're going to be in, especially as you grow the company. It's going to be harder to get, I guess, lucky with certain jobs, right? And every contractor does. Sometimes you just work on a project and it's like, wow, like everything just went right. We priced that really well. We hit 30% profit, right? But over time, it's and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, but I think it's almost better to kind of have more of a set strategy behind it, building that 20% net profit and try doing it the right way. So uh, but and Mike, I think you're in a very unique situation, right? You get to speak with a lot of landscape, hardscape professionals throughout the country, vendors as well. Any other insight or advice you kind of have for contractors out there?
I would say, kind of just going back on our conversation here, when it comes to creating a budget and estimating from that budget, you're putting a clear path towards achieving your goals. So if you incorporate your goals into that budget, you have a path forward to success in achieving those goals, as opposed to shooting from the hip and, say, using a square footage price for a project, which might change depending on the materials that you're trying to quote, and trying to keep track of all those different square footage pricings for different materials, and different access points, and so on and so forth there. I think that budgeting is a great way to set yourself up for success in the industry, beyond just the industry knowledge of being able to install, and putting together a quality product for your business and for your clients, and that you can become a quality company. Beyond what we kind of just talked about there, marketing, I see it being brought up more and more often. I'm big on marketing. I'm big on setting myself up for success in the future. We're coming into, I've heard it time and time again this year, a more difficult time, people getting less and less leads. It was expected after 3 years of tons and tons of demand for our services. It was expected to have some sort of drawback, but we don't know what is going to come next year necessarily. But if you just take the time and invest in a website that is optimized for search engines, if you take the time to work on an Instagram page to show what your company is capable of doing, if you take the time, what I did was I focused on YouTube. It was just more so my strength as opposed to like short form content on Instagram. I focused on YouTube, as well as my website, with drawing from my previous experience in creating and building websites. The YouTube was the next step, and it's helped me immensely in my marketing, in my proposals. It's everything that I do online. It has to support my offline business, my ever after landscaping business. That's how I justify being able to juggle both balls at once. So my YouTube sets me up for the online presence with How to Hardscape, with I Am a Hardscaper, which is the YouTube channel, and more so like the personal side of things. But it also supports my ever after landscaping business because it brings in leads. It took some time, but it's bringing in leads now. In addition to that, I've created videos on every step of the installation process. So when I send a proposal to a client, they see my installation process. They see, okay, this is how we install pavers. We excavate this amount of inches. They can click on that. It'll take them to a video explaining how we excavate and however many inches we need to do for pavers, for retaining walls. Same thing for the next step. We compact our subsoil. We install a geotextile. We have a video specifically about that, and so on and so forth, all the steps. And I let the client know on that initial consultation, we have a very detailed proposal in our software. It generates it automatically for us, so we don't have to type it out every single time and hyperlink every single thing. So that client, when they get that proposal, they can see everything that we're going to do for them and how we're going to do it, as opposed to the contractor that doesn't even do that and just says, 1,000 square foot patio, this is the price. Um, I've talked to all of our clients in the past year that we've been using this proposal method, and I would say 70-80% of people say they went with us because we showed them exactly how we were going to do it, and they were really impressed with that.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think it's thinking about some of those out of the box things that, yeah, it could be easy to tell your marketing company or just internally trying to spend more funds on advertising or,
Hmm.
try and do those different things. But sometimes you have to do those things that maybe aren't the most exciting, right? Like maybe editing YouTube video or
Yep.
trying to find time to kind of work that in. But I think working on some of those things, that I don't there's probably not other companies doing that in your area, right, Michael? With those
Do the
videos?
hard things, right? Yeah, there's definitely not.
Yeah.
So do the things that nobody else is doing, and that's going to kind of give you a leg up when a drawback in leads comes.
Yeah. No, awesome stuff. And what's the best way people can reach out, Michael, in regard to any questions or maybe just to even to have access to some of the resources that you had mentioned today?
For sure. How to Hardscape anywhere, and in terms of How to Hardscape's more so like the community thing, resources for the community. We have free resources, lots of them on howtohardscape.com. The Instagram page is more so a community portfolio, so we just feature projects there. And I would say if you want to learn more about hardscaping, we've got lots of resources at I Am a Hardscaper on YouTube. That's my personal side of things. So I Am a Hardscaper's personal. If you want to learn about how I install projects, there's 200 videos there. And like I said, step-by-step processes of how we install, completely free. And then if you want to dive deeper, we do have paid resources, those installation courses I mentioned. But that's all part of the How to Hardscape headquarters software. And that is our budgeting, estimating, job costing, time tracking, scheduling, and those courses all rolled into that software tool. And that's at members.howtohardscape.com. But if you just go to howtohardscape.com, you'll find everything there.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Michael. Really appreciate you sharing some of the advice with everyone here. And um, definitely we'll have you back on here, someday. But hope you have a great rest of your day, all right?
Joe, thanks so much for having me on, and thank you to yourself and Carla, being excellent supporters of How to Hardscape for, like you said, we've known each other for about 3 years now, and thank you so much. I do really appreciate it.
Awesome stuff, Michael. Well, we'll talk to you soon. All right.
Sounds good.